Baa Baa Black Sheep sent a squadron of young pilots into the sky in 1976. 7 of these cast members are now gone, cremated, scattered at sea, or buried in soil the show never filmed. Before this is over, you will learn where every one of them landed. Number 1 is Robert Conrad, and the hardest chapter of his life was written not on a soundstage, but on a mountain highway. In March 2003, driving with a blood alcohol level near 3 times the legal limit, he crashed head-on into another car near Arnold, California. The other driver, 27-year-old Kevin Burnett, suffered shattered legs and years of surgeries, and Conrad himself was left partly paralyzed by a spinal injury he carried for the rest of his life. Burnett died the following year, and Conrad pleaded no contest and settled a civil suit out of court. On Baa Baa Black Sheep, he was Major Greg Boyington, the swaggering Marine ace who led his misfit pilots and bowed to no authority. Born Conrad Robert Falk in Chicago in 1935, he quit school at 15, drove a milk truck, sang in nightclubs, and clawed toward stardom on the Wild Wild West, performing his own dangerous stunts until a fall nearly killed him. He even dared America to knock a battery off his shoulder in a famous commercial, all narrowed eyes and challenge. His first marriage, to Joan Kenley, lasted 25 years and produced 5 children. His second, to Lavelle DeFan, added 3 more, 8 in all, and his son Shane and daughter Joan both built careers in the business. He won a People's Choice Award for this very series. On February 8, 2020, Robert Conrad died of heart failure in Malibu at 84, just weeks before his 85th birthday. His body was cremated, with no cemetery and no plot, and by family account his ashes returned to open water. Boyington was untouchable on screen. Conrad, the man, spent his last years learning exactly what a single reckless night can take away. The second name is Dirk Blocker, who buried his famous father at 14 and spent the rest of his life being measured against a mountain of a man. His dad was Dan Blocker, the towering Hoss Cartwright of Bonanza and a Korean War veteran who had earned a master's degree and taught school before Hollywood found him, and who died in May 1972 at just 43 from a pulmonary embolism after routine gallbladder surgery. The loss was so public that Bonanza became the first American series ever to write a lead character's death into its story. Dan rests in Woodman Cemetery in DeKalb, Texas, beneath a plain stone reading B. Dan D. Blocker, beside his own parents and sister. On Baa Baa Black Sheep, Dirk played Lieutenant Jerry Bragg, the eager young pilot who worshipped his commander and wanted only to fly. Born in 1957, he carried the Blocker name into a working actor's life that never chased his father's kind of fame. He appeared in horror pictures like Poltergeist and Prince of Darkness, logged dozens of television guest roles, and then found a whole new generation of fans as the gloriously lazy Detective Michael Hitchcock on Brooklyn Nine-Nine from 2013 to 2021. That role, all deadpan sloth and stubborn loyalty, endeared him to viewers who never knew whose son he was. As of April 2026, Dirk Blocker is 68 and still working. Still unmistakably the child of the man millions welcomed into their living rooms every Sunday. Jerry Bragg was the kid who idolized a hero. Dirk Blocker understood exactly what it meant to grow up beside one and to keep flying long after that hero was gone. Third on the roster is Red West, and long before he ever pulled on a Marine uniform for the cameras, he spent 20 years standing between Elvis Presley and the rest of the world. West met Presley in the hallways of Humes High School in Memphis and became one of his closest confidants, a founding member of the group the press called the Memphis Mafia. He worked as a bodyguard, a stuntman, and a songwriter who helped write Separate Ways and other Presley recordings, and he stayed at the King's side through the wildest years of the century. On Baa Baa Black Sheep, he played Sergeant Andy Micklin, the gruff, fist-ready crew chief who kept the squadron's battered planes in the air. The part suited a man who had lived every kind of hard mile. On the very day Elvis died in August 1977, West was on the set filming a fight scene. His loyalty later took a painful turn toward honesty when he co-wrote the book Elvis, What Happened? A warning about Presley's decline that cost him the friendship but told the truth. Away from Elvis, West built a long parallel life as a Hollywood stuntman and character actor, turning up in films such as Roadhouse and dozens of series across 4 decades. He never stopped working, turning in a quietly powerful performance in the acclaimed film Goodbye Solo well into his 70s. On July 18, 2017, Red West died at 81 at Baptist Hospital in Memphis after an aortic aneurysm, in the same city where the whole story began. He was laid to rest at Memorial Park Cemetery in Memphis, Tennessee, only a short drive from the schoolyard where he first met the boy who became the king. Micklin was the squadron's tough, loyal backbone. Red West lived that loyalty for real and carried the weight of one impossible friendship all the way to the end. If you grew up saluting this squadron, tell me in the comments which pilot you remember first, and whether you ever knew that the actor behind Gruff Sergeant Micklin once guarded Elvis Presley himself. At number 4 stands John Larroquette, whose first paid job in Hollywood was murmuring the grim opening narration of the 1974 horror film The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Behind the dry humor was a young man in serious trouble. Larroquette drank and used heavily through his 20s and has said he finally got sober at 32, a choice that almost certainly saved both his life and his career. On Baa Baa Black Sheep, he played Lieutenant Bob Anderson, one more of Boyington's flying black sheep. Born in New Orleans in 1947, he had come up as a radio disc jockey and stage actor, and it was on the play Enter Laughing in 1974 that he met the actress Elizabeth Ann Cookson. They married on July 4, 1975, the only day the production would give them off, and together they raised 3 children, Lisa, Jonathan, and Benjamin. Jonathan went on to co-host a comedy podcast, and Benjamin trained as a musician at Berkeley. After this series ended, Larroquette climbed higher than any of his squadron mates, winning 4 straight Emmy Awards as the oily Dan Fielding on Night Court, then bravely turning his own history into art with a sitcom about a man in recovery. He later added a 5th Emmy for Boston Legal and eventually took Broadway, winning a Tony as well. He even circled back to where he started, re-recording that same eerie chainsaw narration decades later for a new generation of horror fans. As of April 2026, John Larroquette is 78, still married to Elizabeth after more than 50 years, living quietly in the countryside far from the business that once nearly destroyed him. Anderson was a background player among stars. Larroquette became the brightest star of the entire squadron precisely because he found the courage to walk away from the thing that was slowly killing him. Our 5th story belongs to Denise DuBerry, who left acting to build a fortune and then lost her life to an illness almost no one can pronounce. DuBerry arrived in the show's final stretch as Nurse Lieutenant Samantha Green, one of the women written in when the series reworked its cast. Born in 1956, she was barely into her 20s on that set, and though the camera adored her, her sharpest talents turned out to lie in business. She had already appeared in films like Being There and on series from Charlie's Angels and Chips to The Love Boat and Days of Our Lives. But in 1990, she co-founded Thane International, a direct response marketing company behind a long parade of infomercials, and served as its chief creative officer for 15 years. She later launched Blue Moxie Entertainment, produced independent films, and became one of the great champions of the Palm Springs film community beside her husband, Bill Hay. For years, she poured her success back into that desert valley through philanthropy and festival work, quietly becoming a pillar of the place she had chosen as home. Her ending came with brutal speed. In March 2019, she contracted a rare and aggressive fungal infection, and on March 23rd she died at UCLA Medical Center at just 63, gone within weeks of falling ill. Her body was cremated and her ashes were scattered at sea, with a private memorial held that April in the desert valley she had spent years lifting up. Samantha Green was written as a supporting nurse in someone else's war. Denise DuBerry walked off that set and built an empire entirely her own, until a disease few can even name erased it in a matter of days. Number 6 is Robert Ginty, who sat behind a drum kit for Jimi Hendrix before he ever picked up a rifle for the cameras. As a restless young musician out of Brooklyn, Ginty drummed alongside Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Carlos Santana, and John Lee Hooker, then turned sharply toward acting, training at Yale, the neighborhood playhouse, and the Actors Studio. On Baa Baa Black Sheep, he played Lieutenant T.J. Wiley, one more pilot in Boyington's ragged command. Hollywood, though, decided he was an action lead, and in 1980 he headlined the violent hit The Exterminator, the role that made him a mainstay of gritty grindhouse cinema for a decade. Made on a modest budget, the picture became a surprise box office success and spawned a sequel that carried his name for years. Ginty was far too ambitious to sit still in front of a camera. He moved behind it, directing films like The Bounty Hunter in Vietnam, Texas, and he built a long second career as a respected television director. His personal life moved in distinct chapters: 3 marriages across the years, and 2 children, a son, James Francis Ginty, who followed him into acting, and a daughter, Marissa. On September 21, 2009, Robert Ginty died of cancer in Los Angeles at just 60. His family gathered to say goodbye, but his final resting place was never made public. One more of the quiet, unmarked endings this squadron seems to gather to itself. Wiley was simply one more figure in the formation. Robert Ginty was a rock drummer, an action star, and a director who kept reinventing himself, right up until the disease no reinvention could outrun. 7th comes Dana Elcar, who kept right on acting after facing the single thing every performer dreads: the loss of his own sight. In 1991, while starring on MacGyver, Elcar began going blind from glaucoma, and rather than hide it, the producers wrote the condition into his character, letting millions watch a man lose his vision in real time. The storyline opened with an episode fittingly titled Blind Faith and carried his real diagnosis through the rest of the series. Years earlier, on Baa Baa Black Sheep, he had played Colonel Thomas Lard, the blustering officer forever undone by Boyington's schemes, and he stepped behind the camera to direct 4 episodes himself. Born in Ferndale, Michigan, in 1927, Elcar was a character actor of the sturdy old school, the trustworthy face in some 40 films, from The Sting to 2010, The Year We Make Contact, and in dozens of series stretching back to Dark Shadows. He poured his later years into teaching and stage work, building a theater program, and refusing to let blindness end the craft that had defined his whole life. On June 6, 2005, Dana Elcar died of pneumonia in Ventura, California at 77. His body was cremated, and his ashes were given to his family rather than placed in any public ground, a private closing for a man the public watched for 50 years. Lard was the pompous foil the young heroes rolled their eyes at. Dana Elcar was the working craftsman who, handed literal darkness, simply taught himself to keep acting inside it. Take a moment to subscribe if these stories are reaching you, because there are still long marriages, unlikely comebacks, and quiet vanishings ahead that deserve your attention. The 8th name is Simon Oakland, a man who could have filled concert halls with a violin long before he ever filled screens with authority. Oakland trained and worked as a concert violinist, an instrument he never truly set down, before turning to the theater in the 1940s and stacking up Broadway hits that ranged from Light Up the Sky and The Shrike to Inherit the Wind. On Baa Baa Black Sheep, he played Brigadier General Thomas Moore, the exasperated commander who somehow tolerated Boyington's endless insubordination. Film audiences knew his face from darker corners. He was the psychiatrist who calmly explains Norman Bates at the close of Psycho, and the hard-nosed detective Schrank in West Side Story. Television leaned on him constantly, from 2 haunting Twilight Zone episodes to a regular run as the harried editor Tony Vincenzo on Kolchak, The Night Stalker. Across more than 130 productions, Oakland made a specialty of men in charge, and he brought a musician's exacting timing to every one of them. He worked almost to his final breath. On August 29, 1983, a single day after his 68th birthday, Simon Oakland died of colon cancer in Cathedral City, California. His body was cremated, and no public record notes where his ashes came to rest. An odd silence for a man who spent a lifetime being seen and heard. General Moore was the voice of order above the chaos. Simon Oakland was the artist who traded a violin bow for a career playing the men who hold everyone else in line. At number 9, we find Larry Manetti, who stepped off this squadron and into one of the most durable partnerships of his era, on screen and at home alike. A Chicago kid born in 1947, Manetti played Lieutenant Bob Boyle among Boyington's pilots, and when the series ended, he landed the role that shaped his life: Rick Wright, the smooth club owner beside Tom Selleck on Magnum P.I. His steadiest performance, though, never appeared on any call sheet. On February 19, 1980, he married the actress Nancy DeCarl, and the two have stayed side by side ever since, raising their son Lorenzo and later co-hosting a weekly radio program as a team. Manetti outlasted the cruelty of Hollywood by knowing precisely who he was, a working actor with a happy marriage and no grand illusions, and he simply never stopped showing up for the work. When the Magnum PI franchise was revived decades later, he returned in 2019 to play Rick one final time, a warm nod to the fans who had followed him for 40 years. He also set down those Hawaii years in a fond memoir, and he stayed close to his Magnum castmates long after the cameras stopped rolling. As of April 2026, Larry Manetti is 78 and has been married to Nancy for more than 45 years. Boyle was one young pilot in a crowded cockpit. Larry Manetti proved to be the rare survivor who found both lasting fame and a lasting marriage, and refused to let go of either one. 10th is Jeff MacKay, an actor whose famous cousin opened the first door and whose own hard living finally closed the last one. MacKay earned his union card through a small role in All the President's Men, a break nudged along by his cousin, the actor Robert Redford. On Baa Baa Black Sheep, he played Lieutenant Don French, one more young flyer in Boyington's unruly formation. He grew into a familiar television face, most fondly remembered as Mac, the cheerful naval intelligence officer on Magnum PI, a character the writers blew up in a car and then resurrected as a lookalike because viewers missed him too much. He had started young in Saturday morning television as one of the shrunken heroes on Dr. Shrinker, then turned up across Battlestar Galactica and The Greatest American Hero. He reunited with producer Donald Bellisario for Tales of the Gold Monkey, playing the sweet, boozy mechanic Corky across all 22 episodes, and he kept working steadily through Jag, Airwolf, and beyond, the kind of dependable player every production quietly needs. His ending arrived far too early and far too quietly. On August 22, 2008, Jeff MacKay died of liver failure in Tulsa, Oklahoma, at 59, survived by his father and two brothers. His burial was never publicly recorded, and so one more of these pilots slipped away without a marked place on any map. French was a face in the crowd, easy to miss. Jeff MacKay was the actor who made a whole living being impossible to forget in small doses, and then disappeared with almost no trace at all. Number 11 brings James Whitmore Jr., who grew up as the son of an Academy Award nominee, and then built a career his celebrated father never even attempted. His dad was James Whitmore, the honored star of The Shawshank Redemption and decades of film and stage, and carrying that exact name could have flattened a weaker talent. On Baa Baa Black Sheep, the younger Whitmore played Captain Jim Gutterman, one of Boyington's pilots, and he acted across shows like The Rockford Files and Hunter. His truest calling, though, waited behind the camera. Whitmore became one of television's most prolific directors, a full commitment sealed in 1990 when he directed a Quantum Leap episode, and he went on to helm that show's series finale, along with hundreds of episodes of NYPD Blue, The X-Files, Star Trek, The Next Generation, JAG, 24, Grey's Anatomy, and some 50 episodes of NCIS spanning 2 decades. Remarkably, he was still calling action in 2025 on newer series like Elsbeth, more than 40 years after first stepping behind the lens. He found the work that fit him and stayed loyal to it, trading the exposure of acting for the steadier command of the director's chair. As of April 2026, James Whitmore Jr. is 77 and still directing, having quietly outlasted the fame of the show that first strapped him into a cockpit. Gutterman was a pilot in someone else's squadron. James Whitmore Jr. walked out of a famous father's shadow and became the man who told hundreds of other people's stories from behind the lens. The last name is W.K. Stratton, the single man who flew every mission this series ever put on the air. Born Walter Kirk Stratton Jr. in Front Royal, Virginia, in 1950, Stratton appeared in all 36 episodes of Baa Baa Black Sheep, more consistently than almost anyone else on the roster. He played Lieutenant Larry Casey, a steady, reassuring presence in Boyington's cockpit across both seasons. What he built afterward was never stardom but something rarer: endurance, the long and unshowy career of a working actor who simply kept getting hired. Stratton logged decades of television, including a recurring run as Commander Ted Lindsay on JAG through the 1990s and into the 2000s, a turn as a wealthy heir named Larry Stanton across 3 episodes of Quantum Leap, and a steady stream of films spanning 5 decades. He never became a household name, and by every public sign he made peace with that, a professional who prized the job itself over the noise around it. As of April 2026, W.K. Stratton is 75, one of the survivors of a squadron that has now lost more than half its members. Casey was the reliable wingman who always seemed to be there. W.K. Stratton lived that same quiet steadiness for real, a 5-decade career built not on fireworks but on showing up, take after take, year after year. A milk truck driver scattered on the Pacific, a bodyguard resting in Memphis clay, a general's ashes lost to record. This squadron came home to places the war itself never reached,